Isn't that awesome though? The way we see the world is through the lens of a texture painter. It's great.
Welcome to The Naked Texture Artist. On this podcast, I have deep and honest conversations with visual effects and animation veterans about their challenges and growth as working artists. My name is Mark-Pierre Sondergaard, and I'll be your host. Let's get started. How long has this writer's strike been going on now? Working in visual effects has for a long time felt like all those animals in the savannah, with the last rain being months or years ago, and the watering hole or the river just shrinking, and more animals perishing, and the rest growing ever desperate. I was laid off at ILM in Disney's first round of staff cuts back in March. Who knows how many rounds of cuts they've had since. Since then, I've been hiding out, working extremely local independent films, which should be unconnected from what goes on at the picketing lines in Hollywood. Every day, another news item on LinkedIn about another studio cutting 10 to 15% of the staff. And every week, another studio going under altogether. As more and more green circles adorn the portraits of LinkedIn, you start feeling like you're the only artist still left working in visual effects. If you've listened to my past conversations with Chris Nichols, you know my disbelief that I was working and he was not. Mr. Thanos unemployed while an upstart like me collected paychecks? It just felt like the universe was out of whack. But no more. So I was laid off the other day. Being summoned for an unscheduled meeting with HR on a Friday. That's never good news. And to all of you who are already in that pickle, or find yourself with that green ring around your portrait in days, weeks, or months to come, my heart goes out to you. It really does. How are you feeling? Shame? Doubting your worth as a person? Feeling like you messed up, but you just can't figure out where? Yeah, it stings. We are artists. We're not some other kind of person who happens to do art. We are what we do, so it can really hurt. It can really mess with your head. We love what we do, but oh boy, we also suffer for our craft. My wife is an accountant. Accountants have jobs they keep for years and years and even decades. She has a life where you can plan your life and count on a salary for years and years ahead. There are no writer's strikes every 15 or so years in her world. Nobody lays off accountants. Hey, if accountants are being laid off en masse, it will be on the front pages of the newspapers because the world is practically ending then. Accountants don't also need to practice the latest software or basic math in their spare time. But we do. We love what we do. But we also can't be blind to the fact that we fundamentally work in an industry with a broken business model. The big film studios will unerringly complain about this or that threat to their very existence while posting record profits almost every year. While for VFX vendors, it's a race to the bottom, ever being squeezed on paper-thin margins. And we find ourselves in the middle of all of that. As artists, in terms of temperament and psychology, we are often ill-equipped to deal with such situations. It's not easy. Like I said, my heart goes out to all of you affected by this. And if you're not affected by it, good for you, but better sleep with one eye open. So this is not an amazing time right now. Right now, I'm sitting on a mountain of delicious recordings from all kinds of incredible texture artists. But you know, when you've just received bad news, you're feeling a bit off. You know, you need a bit of artist's comfort food. And there's just nothing that beats Chris Nichols. One, he's a brilliant artist and not shy about sharing his secrets. Two, he's a genuinely nice person. Three, and even after all this time, he is still in love with the work we do. And when you feel a bit ticked off, that is just what the doctor ordered to get that smile back on your face. So all those other recordings will have to wait, as we, in this episode, gleefully dive back into my conversation with Chris Nichols, the texture artist who brought Thanos to life on the big screen. In this episode, we continue to dive deeper into the weeds of what makes Chris the artist he is. We speak a lot about physical and mental routines that help keep Chris producing on a high level. Actually, if you didn't know any better, you might think I was talking to an athlete in a high-pressure competitive sport. But why not? In visual effects, we are expected to produce amazing works of art and creativity under intense pressure. Living off pizza and sleeping under your desk just can't reliably produce the mental and physical output we need to do our jobs well at the top level. We also compare notes from a show we both worked on a million years ago, and then Chris explains where he finds inspiration in nature for his creative work. In short, comfort food for artists. Enjoy. You also mentioned burnout. How do you were working on Thanos for what, a year and a half, something like that, all told?
A year and a half. Yeah, that initial test we did, most of the heavy lifting was done in probably the first 6 months. And I would say that there was probably a further 9 months of refinement after that, where it was just like working on the calluses of his hands and, whatever variations he gets his hand cut off. I don't want to give away spoilers, but stuff gets severed. There's frequent updates to textures and versions.
How do you avoid burnout over that long stretch? Because you must be just sick of looking at the same thing. Even if you know that this is groundbreaking and is all, everybody's like excited and this is, like you got this super team together and that, definitely. But that's a long time looking at exactly the same thing over and over.
Well, that was the thing, I think, was that 6 months there was so much momentum and I put most of my effort into that. The remaining couple of years of working on Endgame as well as Infinity War, I was also texturing Red Skull as well. Like that was my main asset.
Cool.
And then there was like a lot of ingested assets from Framestore, from Weta and ILM that we had to also get into the pipeline. So there was always stuff to work on. Some of it was more technical and less creative. And so I was frequently able to take little breaks instead of being myopic and focused 24/7. There were periods of those shows where I wouldn't even get to do my own work until 5 p.m. Because I've been busy in meetings and trying to work out some issue that somebody was having. And yeah, and so it almost felt like it was me time by the time I actually got to work on the box and do some texturing. I was like, oh, this is fun. I'm getting to like do some painting.
You and Mari undisturbed.
Yeah.
Burnout is a very real thing. Yeah, we love our work, but turns out that too much of a good thing can be a problem. Of course, when you're forced to work ungodly hours for weeks on end, it's no surprise there will be nothing left in the tank after a while. And once you've driven that car till it's completely broken down, now it'll take a long time to get it up and running again. Like I said, sometimes that's sadly out of your hands. Other times it can be self-inflicted, and it is in your own hands. I remember a show where I joined the show late, and they had 1 million background assets with a template material for an established look. Basically, you just had to add that material to the geometry, adjust a few things, render a turntable, then publish. Like I said, there were 1 million of them. And after we'd finished those, there were some vague promises of some more exciting assets. So I just went full steam on those assets. Although they were maybe scheduled for maybe 1 or 1.5 per day in shot grid, I just banged them out to the tune of 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 a day. Basically, as quickly as I could get the court to assign them to me in shot grid, I just wanted to get them out of the way. But in that process, I was voluntarily overworking myself and ended up burning out later in the process. That was unnecessary. Imagine how confusing this must have been for production. In the beginning, they're thinking, my goodness, we got an absolute stud on our team. And then towards the end, it's like, what happened to this dud? We thought we could trust him to be productive. Burnout can certainly also occur when you have to look at the same asset over and over for months and months on end. On one hand, it just becomes harder and harder to see the forest for the trees, and your mental sharpness and motivation will also drop over time. That's why I asked Chris and many other artists how they handle this. What was Chris' answer? Variety helps. How does that old saying go? A change is as good as rest. Looking at something new and different certainly helps cleanse your mental palate, which can give a boost to your mental energy. By the way, did you notice Chris basically being in the same predicament as Claudia, trying to steal time for the hero work once all the other more practical parts of being a lead were out of the way? Man, a good soup really works hard for the money, huh? Not all roses being the boss. Back to avoiding burnout with variety. That said, I find you have sort of a finite mental budget for each day, like a tank full of gas. Certain things will burn a lot more gas than others, and certain things can only be done if you still have a decent level of gas left in the tank. Once you have run out of gas, your work slows down to an imperceptible crawl. So avoiding burnout and knowing how best to structure your work so as to economize your resources is key. Endlessly swapping between tasks to create a bit of variety then? That also doesn't work because there's a mental price for context switching. Once you break out of the flow state of one task, it takes a fairly long time to enter flow on the next task, and each separate task carries a mental energy tax with it. Kind of how your computer would need to use time, power, storage, and clock cycles to load in the files needed for another asset. Switching files constantly on your computer would slow you down. The same for your brain as you switch context from one task to another. So swapping tasks every 5 minutes in order to generate mental energy and focus is obviously not the solution. What is then? I don't have the perfect answer, sadly, which is why I keep asking other artists. Hey, I'm making this podcast as much for myself as I do it for you. But I think always being aware of these different issues and treating them in a balanced way is certainly a start.
But I don't know, there was good vibes on that project. I mean, we had the trust of the client, and very little went wrong. It was one of those shows that should have been a massive pain, but was fairly pain free.
Yeah.
I can't explain it. It really happens, but I think those Avengers films, they turned out great. Everybody had a good time, and there just wasn't a lot of griping or complaining.
Is that the best show you've ever had?
Oh, by far.
Oh.
I would say by far, yeah. It was kind of the culmination of everything coming together, a lot of technologies. That facial pipeline had been completely overhauled, and it was kind of ready for something meaty to go through it. And so that was a perfect opportunity for that. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's like texturing XYZ. That was the first time I got to test out the texturing XYZ workflow. So there was a lot of trying to push the quality, the fidelity level to a point it had never been before. So yeah, that was pretty thrilling. But I don't remember feeling burnt out at all on that show. Like I don't even remember taking a break after the show. Really,
Wow.
I think I may have taken a week off or something like that. But
Oh, so this
I mean,
really did that euphoria just really just carried you through.
yeah, I think so. I if I get bored on a project, that's when I get burnt out. If the momentum slows down and you feel like you're just spinning your wheels, I get very tired. Like I honestly would just want to lay down on the ground and take a nap when that happens. But
How
if
do you will yourself through the boring spells?
oh, I tell you what, it's really hard. Hey, if you've got a supervisor that's just driving you crazy, you have to remember you're a paid artist. You're a commercial artist at
True.
the end of
Yeah,
the
they do
day.
pay
And
our rent. It's true.
yeah, exactly. And there's a certain level of professionalism that you need to bring to the table every day. Even if you don't like the project or you're not that into the direction, people are going to remember you more for your faults than they are your positives. So if you start complaining or drop the ball, that's what people are going to remember. That's where your reputation is going to lie. And so I think that, not everybody is going to be very invested in what they're doing all the time. But as a paid professional in this industry, you need to bring your professionalism to the forefront. As far as like how you deal with burnout, I mean, I've just taken a month off and I'm feeling very refreshed. I didn't even know I needed it, but I feel
So
like
you don't have any techniques for sort of spotting it coming at you at a distance and then avoiding it. But you just once you hit the wall, take time off, go get back in the saddle.
yeah, I think, I mean, if you have the opportunity to go take a walk and enjoy some sun, I think that's amazingly refreshing. And I think like science has shown that, especially if you get up in the morning before coffee and go for a walk, even a 20-minute walk in the sun, that wakes up your endocrine system and
Absolutely.
kind of gets you're energized and ready for the day. So I try to incorporate that. But I live in Vancouver where we only get 4 months of sun. The rest of the time it's pretty overcast and dreary. So
What are you doing, man? You came from Australia that has the most sun hours in the entire
I,
world. You know.
I know I made some big sacrifices to get here, as I mentioned, and
Ab-
one of them was leaving Australia.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Hmm.
Yeah. But I think another thing is this is one of the things that comes from, just getting older. Like I just turned 40 this year. So
I hate you
I
so
need,
much. I'm 49. I'm 49, and you're already 18 years in. I hate you so much.
age is just a number, right?
And it is
But
not. Once you pass 45, I would say, then age stop being just a number. It becomes real.
okay, oh, that's coming up. But I mean, for me, I am prioritizing sleep and health a lot more than I used to.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I recognize bad habits and try to squash them. I try to eat better. I quit drinking. I mean, I was never a big drinker to begin with, but I was messing up my sleep and my gut health as well.
Yeah.
And I find if like sleep determines everything, your energy, the way you treat people, your attitude. You can handle so much more if you've had a proper night's sleep than
100%.
if you're
100%.
if you're on 4 or 5 hours and broken sleep as well.
Yeah.
So I would recommend anybody that's listening, if you haven't figured out your sleep, get that figured out, and it would improve your life more than anything you could eat or drink or whatever. That I think that determines so much. You need that time to regenerate. Your brain needs that break. Your body needs that break.
How far are you
Um,
with sleep optimization? Are you do you have the temperature controlled bed? Do you
yeah,
melatonin, the
yeah.
blackout blinds, all of that stuff?
I'm a big believer in habit stacking.
Okay, yeah.
So you what you do essentially, you kind of take one care of one thing at a time until you it just becomes habitual. Whether that is, so for sleep, I'll take melatonin at about 9 o'clock, so that by about 10:30 I'm ready to go to bed. I turn on the aircon in summer so that it's cold, and then
Blue light?
I
Any blue light after
yeah,
eight
exactly,
o'clock or something like that?
turn
Or
off the blue light filter, that kind of stuff. Low lighting. There's all these like little things that can help. but also I try not to watch anything stimulating as well after a certain point. Like if I watch something that like a film or something like that, or a documentary that's going to be playing in my brain for hours at a time after, try to avoid that. You really want to have very little stimulus, I think, at night. So, and also the other thing, wake up at the same time every day. So I wake up at around 6:37. So again, it's that habit, and I
Yeah.
think it gets better as you get older too. Like I find I'm a much more habitual person
Yeah.
in my late 30s to 40.
Do you use extreme temperatures such as sauna or cold plunges or something like that?
Oh man, now you're talking my language. I'd like to. I mean, I've been reading a lot about that
Yeah.
lately. I have been trying the cold, like the ice baths
Uh
lately.
huh.
I'm getting better at it. Like you do acclimatize, but I don't have access to a sauna, unfortunately. But
No, me neither. I wish I could tap into the sauna, but you can get these sort of like basically an electric sleeping bag that you can sort of like have around you and produce a sauna wherever you are, that way around. They're not cheap though, but
yeah,
I think we listen to the same podcasts. But
yeah.
but
I
I did
mean,
I did ice I did cold showers for 2 years, and I'm
ooh,
sorry to say it did nothing for me, and it was a hard
okay.
investment to put in. These are not easy, you know.
No,
It's
I think
not.
cold showers, they're the worst because it's a constant barrage of cold.
Yeah,
So
the
it feels
buffeting
like
sort
ice
of.
picks.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can't do that. I'm the sort of person that I can do an ice bath, but I'll slide into it slowly
sure.
and I'll put more ice in the water as I'm acclimatizing to it. So it's not that full on shock. But I do, especially for like after working out, it does help my muscles recover way faster.
Yeah, yeah.
And also like I'm one of those people where if I work out say later in the day, then by the time I go to bed, there's still a lot of
Oh yeah.
cortisone in my
The
system.
heart
Cortisol,
is
sorry.
going too fast. You
Yeah.
can't rest yet. No.
So you're not going to get a good night's sleep. Even if you get to sleep, you'll probably wake up
Yeah.
intermittently throughout the night. So, I mean, that's another thing that I've been trying to overcome is to avoid that because every second day I don't want to have a bad night's sleep. So whether that is, that's where the ice baths really help because they get rid of that cortisol
Okay.
in your system. But yeah, I mean, this is the sort of things you need to think about as you get older too. It's just like,
Sure. When
well,
you're 20, you're bulletproof. You think, I don't need any of these things. I can sleep 2 hours a night, no problem. I'll just sleep in
yeah,
on the weekend. But
yeah,
then, as the teeth of mortality starts chewing on you, you need to optimize these things.
yeah. Like I was finding that my just my mind wasn't working as well. Like I wasn't making as good critical decisions as I used to, or creative ones too. And that was starting to worry me a little bit because I'm like, oh, I'm starting to lose my edge. So I had to just make some adjustments. I got my blood test, like I had a blood test done to see where everything was at, and what I needed to adjust to kind of get me back to an optimal sort of health. Because for me, that makes me a better artist. It makes me a better person in general. I'm just more optimistic. I'm less affected by stress.
Yeah.
So I think everybody that has deals with some form of anxiety needs to do something about it.
If you didn't know better, you'd think Chris was discussing the routines of professional athletes in high stakes sport. I once heard a story about Michael Jordan injuring his Achilles tendon before an important game, an injury that would normally sideline him for a longer spell. Not wanting to miss this important game, he spent the entire night alternating between ice baths and hot tubs. For extreme temperature treatments that are known to speed up healing, he did 75 baths in each extremity of the temperature range, 75 times back in and out of the hot and then the cold. But he managed to play the game the next day. For athletes that make many millions of dollars and whose work and efforts impact many billion-dollar sport franchises, it makes sense to optimize life with the latest technology and cutting-edge research for human performance. We live in an era of body hacking, where a lot of these technologies and certainly the research behind these techniques are known to the common man, if only you're willing to look. On a small level, maybe that looks like not starting your day with a breakfast of refined carbs and sugar, so that you're not battling cravings and energy slumps all day long. But why stop there? There are great improvements in terms of energy and focus to be found in many other areas of our life, which would improve any type of job performance, also in our industry. And let me tell you, sure, in your 20s, you're pretty much invincible physically. But no, that doesn't mean that you're an amazing specimen outside of the laws of physics. Nah, sorry to break it to you. You just haven't had your ass kicked yet. But believe me, that will happen as sure as night follows day. When that happens, increasing the volume of your gas tank by taking charge of your diet, sleep, and exercise can really yield some amazing results. As artists, we spend so much time practicing our craft and so many other things to help us break through and stay sharp once we've done so. Why stop there? Improving ourselves goes way beyond learning the latest plugin or relearning art fundamentals. Hey, if it's good enough for Mr. Thanos, it's good enough for you. Enough said. Do you do anything mentally, like a meditation, for example, or journaling, or affirmations, or something like that for your mental game?
If I get very stressed out, what I find helps is writing it down
Yeah.
by hand, not on a computer, but actually
No.
writing it by hand in a book. I don't journal as a habit. I might look into that though. That sounds like a good thing to do. I don't meditate either, but I definitely have certain techniques to help me get through stressful periods, especially when I feel like a deadline is encroaching and I just need to sort of block out a lot of white noise in my head.
Anything you care to share? Because this could be very useful.
Yeah, I think well, for me, what works really well is to put on some sort of ambient sort of soundscapes. Um, so delta brainwaves.
Okay.
That is, have you heard of that before?
I mean,
It's
I
basically just a sort of a sine wave, like a hum that's it has is a certain brain frequency, a sort of certain frequency that your brain will help you become a lot more focused and kind of tune things out. So that helps a lot. Actually, a really great artist that I like to listen to is Biosphere.
okay.
Um, he's like an electronic artist from the 90s, but he put out like a lot of great records that are very ambient. But I'll just listen to those on repeat, and that'll always kind of get me in the zone if I need to. But yeah, trying to find something that will get you in the zone. Some people listen to audiobooks or podcasts. I do that as well, but that can be a little bit unpredictable. But if you've got something that you just it's going to give you the same result every time, then yeah, I would recommend something like that. But Biosphere, Substrata's the album, but I recommend trying something like that. But there's a lot of ambient, soundscape stuff out there. Soundtracks are good. Baroque music.
I remember. So I started at Digital Domain London. There, I was a runner with a distinct purpose. I wanted to be a texture artist, and just got my foot in the door as a runner. And I eventually moved into texturing from there. And then the second studio I worked for there, after, now I felt like, okay, I'm a made man. Now I have 2 credits. I'm whatever. So now here we are, texturing for real. And I remember the first day at that studio, and I come in there, and there's no lead. Some people, he's on vacation this week. He's coming back on Friday. And there's a couple of colleagues, and talking to them, and we're sort of like, okay, what's going on here? And then at some point, production staff comes by and says like, oh yeah, you have this asset here. We have dailies at 3:00.
Oh my gosh.
And my workstation wasn't still up, and I had no idea, like the whole pipeline, checking in an asset or whatever, bringing it out and whatever. And it was still impressed upon me. I needed to show something by 3:00. On this, I mean, in hindsight, I'm thinking a ridiculously simple asset, like Mark 12 years in, okay, I could do that in 5 minutes, but that Mark couldn't. And I couldn't think of anything better than to run out of the building, find a corner shop, get some alcohol, just simply calm myself down to the point where I could start moving forward.
Yeah.
What would you have done in that situation?
Oh, alcohol definitely doesn't work for me. If anything, that exacerbates problems.
Okay, right?
I think I
I
get,
mean, long
you
term, I
know,
agree with you. But for me, it was just about quiet, the screaming noises
yeah,
in my head so much that I at least could have some conscious thought that could go into the
yeah.
pushing the pen around, you know?
I mean, these days, I would say breathing techniques would probably help, like the Wim Hof
Oh,
kind of breathing technique where you're sucking in air
yeah.
and you're doing that for, hold it in for 6 seconds, let it out, and just do that for like 30 seconds at a time. I find that can really decompress things and just allow yourself to have that time. It's like, all right, I'm going to take 2 minutes just to work on this breathing stuff. I'm not going to think about anything else. And I think that is a really great way to sort of clear your mind. But when I was on Ender's Game, it's awesome that we both worked on that because I didn't know that we both had worked on that project.
No, I felt like we were sort of like the illegitimate redhead stepchild kind of thing. Like I remember seeing on, it was CG Society back in those days, in big portal website. I remember seeing all this, like the DD people were speaking out of, oh yeah, we had a great time and being interviewed about the show and whatever. And
Yeah.
some of our work was shown in there, but there was no mention whatsoever of the London people. We felt
Yeah,
a
I'll
little
be honest.
felt a little slighted, sort of like, hey,
Yeah.
we did these shots, you know. But I mean, I'm
Um,
not saying obviously you guys did the heavy lifting on it, but it wasn't inconsequential what we brought to the table. But anyway, sorry, that's
yeah.
just a little aside.
I mean, it's very unfortunate that that happened, but I mean, that can happen between, like, right now, we're in a world where most studios have satellite studios all over the place.
Sure, yeah,
So you might have a headquarters in London, but there might be one in, two in India, one in Australia, one in London, America, Canada. And so there's very little communication between those studios as far as who does what. And it's a bit unfortunate because I do feel like we're a community and we have a lot in common as well. Like all my best friends are all people that work in the industry. I've been very fortunate to find my tribe in a way. Um, and yeah, that just tends to happen. Is that, like, I've worked at DNEG as well, where there was absolutely no communication between the English DNEG. Even though we're working on the same projects. Yeah, but
sorry,
I mean, as
I
far
was
as
taking you out of your stride there. You were about to say something different
I
about
think,
Ender's Game
yeah.
and maybe the
Well,
stress
I
and
was I was working on the Queen, the Formic Queen, on that project, and that was really exciting for me because I was a fan of the book, and I really liked the design that we got from Tully Summers, who was the concept artist for that. Uh, and but there was a lot of, like, we're not quite sure what this should look like. Praying Mantis was the logical sort of reference point, but I remember getting very stressed out because I was working with a look dev artist that I was having a very hard time communicating with. I was in Vancouver, John was down in LA, and we had never worked together before, and we were sort of put together to spearhead this creature, and I just didn't speak his technical language. Like, he was a RenderMan guy, and he was sort of talking in basically a different language to me.
right.
And it wasn't until we were set, like, I went down to LA for a week, and we got to, like, know each other and went out for dinner and really started to, yeah, he was talking about his experiences. Like, he built the Batmobile in Batman Forever.
Cool.
That's how long ago he had been working.
Wow.
And so and he'd, like, done all this awesome stuff. And it wasn't until we started talking about iRobot, and he was telling me about how they did the translucency effect in iRobot, that I was like, oh, that's really interesting, or maybe we can take that novel approach. And so it, it's just that melding of two minds, and that really kind of, it felt like I wasn't carrying all this on my own shoulders. And I feel like you need to collaborate to really get to that next level, because generally, the people you're working with are very experienced as well. You just sort of have to figure out how your skill set can play with theirs in an effective way. And eventually, I think we got a really nice result. Like
Oh
we were
yeah, yeah.
pushing V-ray shading way beyond what it was capable of, like refractive subsurface. This is way before AL surface shader or any of those sophisticated subsurface materials. But yeah, we just had a lot of time, right? Like that was what was different back then, is that they would give you the time to play and develop and try things. Like we must have done 50 different versions of the Queen before we finally got the approval of Matt Butler and the director. His name escapes me now, but really nice guy. But yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. I mean, we'd probably do it a little bit different now, and we'd probably do it in a tenth of the time. But it was a really good, exciting time for me.
I do think it turned out very well. And these alien creatures, it's always so hard to produce something that hasn't existed and can't exist and still have that air of believability, as in, yeah, I can see this working, you know. So you're
Yeah.
you're sort of you're playing with natural parameters, that the laws of physics and the laws of how creatures normally, you know, act and behave and look like, with in terms of anatomy and what have you. But still, you need to take it to that otherworldly place. It's a very hard Twilight Zone to just get right, and the Queen looked
Yeah.
fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think the hardest thing was you try, like our reference point were mantises and very small animals, right? Like mantises are, in general, they're only what, about 10, 15 centimeters long.
Yeah.
And this creature was supposed to be huge, like 7 feet high, with a head the circumference of a horse. So, I mean, you want to take inspiration, but you need to also translate it to make it feel realistic. So you're transposing information from a reference point to whatever the creature is. And so I think that's where the challenges lie, is how do you sell that but still kind of get the same effect. And I see that a lot with creatures that I just don't like in projects, where I just don't feel like they've sold the weight. I don't feel like they've sold the gravity. The subsurface is too strong. Like there's all these things that I feel like hasn't been properly thought out. But the best creatures in film, the ones that stand the test of time, I think they just have a lot of those considerations put into them.
Yeah, scale for me, I feel, is just one of the hardest things to. If you just sort of just go by the default settings of whatever you're doing inside of computer graphics, everything looks like small little toys, you know. So, I mean, I haven't spent very much time with creatures. It just hasn't turned out that way for me. But I've spent a lot of time on spaceships, for example, and they always need to look humongous. And you know, you were talking about weight as well, which is, I'm sure, is going to be an eternal problem for animators to convey that in a believable way. But certainly, scale is just how do you communicate that immense scale of a huge spaceship, or in this case, a queen alien that is. When your reference thing is this tiny little insect, and you can't just blow that up in size, and there you are, you're done. It doesn't
Yeah,
work that way, you know. The
yeah.
once your scale increases in physical space, new details starts coming in and what have you, and a very difficult
That,
balance to get right.
well, that was a really interesting project for me too. That was back when I was still doing a lot more of my own texture development stuff. And one of the things that really helped was if you look at like close-up photos of mantises and a lot of translucent bugs, there's all this viscera under the surface. You're looking at volumes under there, and we could never achieve that with our shading model. You couldn't have a piece of geometry under the surface that would be slightly blurred when you're looking at it from the outer layer. So we had to fake it a lot of the time with the texture work. That was one of the big challenges, trying to get a depth map that actually looked believable and realistic. But obviously, it doesn't refract, because if you're looking at it from a different angle, it's a 2D effect. So it doesn't quite look as good as a full 3D model.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the things that I did was I got a bunch of meat, like different. I went to the butcher and just got disgusting looking pieces of fatty meat, whatever I could find, organs, and I scanned them on my flatbed scanner and photographed them as well. but scanning seemed to be the best way. And then I would just grayscale those to get really interesting, weird shapes, just because I couldn't find it online.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it was like one of those fun things. It was like, well, what if I try this? I love those projects where you actually have to go out into the world
Yeah.
and try to bring something into the digital. It always makes it more memorable and a fun
I
process.
want to hear how you clean that flatbed scanner because that's been through a few things.
Well, yeah, I think I ended up just throwing it out.
Right.
It was so disgusting by the end. It had like silicon all over it, and it was so big. Like it was one of those very high resolution scanners,
Mm.
and so it was like half the size of my table, and it was so impractical to move around from apartment to apartment. So eventually, I just was like, all right, I'm done with this. I'm I'm just gonna have to throw it out. But we had some good times, me and that scanner.
Yeah, definitely. I had a friend at university that he wanted to do a zombie character. So he went out and did what you did. Like he bought a chicken and just basically let it decompose and kept taking reference photos of it, as it's sitting out there on the porch until the
Yeah.
neighbors are complaining. But yeah,
That's exactly what they did on I Am Legend. Like Sony did that
really?
for the zombies. Yeah, they got a bunch of meat and photographed it over a period of 4 weeks as it decomposed, and then used all those photos
Hey,
as textures. I feel like that's why texturing is such a fun job, or can be,
yeah.
is because yeah, you can incorporate all these abstract sort of techniques to get an effect.
Yeah, I agree. I love texturing because surfaces are just endlessly complex. But it's also really
Mm.
cool sometimes when you see, for example, some patterns that are repeating in disparate elements. So let's say maybe you find, I don't know, apple skin has this pitted look. And all of a sudden you can see that pattern repeats in, like, say, certain pores, whatever, on a mammal, like a piece of fruit and a living, breathing thing, has nothing to do with each other. But it's like nature has this internal logic that allows you to sometimes take some elements from one world and use them believably in another world altogether. That's very
Sure.
fascinating.
Yeah, no, I love that. There is a universal logic to nature, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, there is.
But I like what was I geeking out about the other day? When I was in Australia last, I went crabbing and I got some beautiful blue mana crabs, and I posted these on my Facebook as well. But they have you know what applied diffusion is?
Applied diffusion?
Yeah,
No, but
it's
it
essentially
sounds interesting.
it's like a pattern that's found in nature. Um, you have to look it up. It looks awesome, but you find it frequently on sea life, like especially fish. Like a lot of catfish have this pattern on their back. It's very hard to replicate in CG. I'm sure you could probably do it in Houdini, but essentially it's like it morphs from one pattern to another, and that's the applied diffusion. There's like a mathematical equation behind it, but it's you see it frequently on sea life, especially crabs and fish.
I
But
need to see this because whenever I'm tasked with producing something alien, for example, Thor 4 I was working on, and we were doing a lot of alien creatures for one of the final battles there. And my first go-to is always I go to lobsters, shellfish, things like that. They have such amazing patterns that at a glance they look like this, and then when you zoom in a little bit further, it's now a completely different pattern, and you keep going in and it just keeps having levels to it,
yeah,
until you're
it's like a
so
fractal.
exactly.
Mm.
It's amazing. So it's such a rich buffet you can pull from.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think sea life and reptiles are generally my go-tos. I think my reference material libraries are always full of sea life and reptiles because I just find them infinitely fascinating
Yeah.
and inspirational.
And we're fortunate that sea life is in a world that where we don't really go naturally. So they're not like, let's say if you're doing a zebra pattern or something from mammal world, we've seen that. So like it's been done. It's been so worn out. It's a cliche now. Whereas a lot of those patterns are kept hidden away from human eyes. So they can still have a freshness to them when you're using them. They haven't been overdone.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I feel like Avatar is definitely sort of taking a lot of inspiration from sea life with their creature designs, but I love it. I think it's great. Like, especially, this is another technique. If you're burnt out, if you can get out to nature,
Yeah.
and as texture painters, I think we all naturally find patterns in nature that other people probably wouldn't even notice. Like, I just went out hiking with a couple of people from work last weekend, and they pulled out their cameras just to take some photo of rust. It's just a natural thing
Well,
that we
that's
do.
a very texture artist thing. My goodness, it's I'm always forever taking pictures, and if we're with other people, my wife has to say, "Oh, it's just something he does for work," because what's the idiot doing now? Some mud splatter he's looking at, or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome though? The way we see the world is through the lens of a texture painter. It's great.
I think it's a double-edged sword because on one hand, yes, you find wonder and awe in everything around you, but on the other hand, sometimes your eyes will never allow you to rest. There's always something. You're like the Terminator, just always scanning, bzz, 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 scanning everything around you, and you're always on the job. Sometimes it would be nice to just be able to turn it off. But
Oh yeah.
there we are. Yeah. So what do you have against babies? Chris Nichols will be back in a future episode. Thanks for spending a little bit of your day with us. We have a tiny bit of housekeeping to do on the way out. If this episode has been helpful to you, why not share the podcast with your colleagues and friends? If you'd like to support the podcast, I'd appreciate if you bought me a coffee. You can do that on Ko-fi. That is spelled ko-fi.com/The Naked Texture Artist. One word. If you have suggestions, comments, or questions, I'd love to hear them. Feel free to drop me a line on thenakedtextureartist@gmail.com. That is the Naked Texture Artist written out in all one word at gmail.com. As I mentioned, having a busy day job in visual effects means my release schedule for this podcast can be a bit irregular. So if you don't want to miss out, subscribe to the Naked Texture Artist wherever you get your podcasts. Or follow the podcast on the socials, then you'll be alerted when the next episode drops. The music in this episode was Awake by Tycho. Nick Sifoni helped put the sound together, and everything else was done by me, your host, Mark Pierre Sondergaard. Speak to you soon.